Good vibrations.
Welcome to the first episode of The Brave New World of 2019, and it's a far-reaching one today as we're stepping outside of the confines of this 5-sense 3D reality into other realms, which is always a good thing to do, I find. And my guest is Dr. Mary-Helen Hensley.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
We got it going one way or another, not without a few obstacles.
No obstacle too great to talk to you, Mark.
Well, thank you. I did ask the universe to make this happen this morning, so it's only right that it is. Otherwise, I would start to worry. Anyway, so I was present at the Open Minds Ireland conference in Waterford in November, did a talk there, and you yourself did a presentation. And obviously there was a great array of speakers and subjects there. Big shout to Trevor and all the organisers for putting that on. But the one that really blew me away was your talk, because it built upon information that I'd heard a few years ago from Dolores Cannon at the Glastonbury Symposium, and she's since passed away. But her talk was, it really kind of spoke to me in a profound way. And yours was delivered also in a very impactful way with lots of passion and personal experience thrown into the mix. And it really resonated with me. It's all about the true nature of ourselves, why we end up incarnating into this reality that we call life and animate in a human body, and what happens to us when this temporary experience is all over. And I would be amazed if there's anyone out there that hasn't spent at least a small amount of time in their life reflecting on these big questions. You know, does anyone really not ever think about these things? You know, there's a lot to cover here, but I guess we have to start with the anecdote that you told at the Ireland event. And I know that you'll have told this 1,000 times, but if you can bear to go through it all again, this is your personal story of how you had an out-of-body experience which led to your deep understandings of, you know, our true nature and your own mission. So would you like to share that with the listeners, and the conversation can kind of evolve from there?
Absolutely. Well, it wasn't too long from now, about 27 years ago. It was December 14th, 1991. And I had just graduated from college, and I had moved to Charleston, South Carolina in the States. And I was on my way to a Christmas party. And as it is in Charleston, South Carolina in December, it was quite warm. So I was wearing my Santa Claus t-shirt and my bright red Bermuda shorts. And I was on my way to a Christmas party where I worked, and having just graduated with 2 degrees in communications and graphic design and worked in television, I was currently mopping floors in a sign company, because that's kind of all my big degrees with no experience had gotten me at that stage. And so I was leaving my apartment, and just about 2 miles from where I lived, I hit an intersection which ran into a major highway in South Carolina. And if you're familiar with American highways, you know, there's lots of lanes of traffic going each way. And so I was coming off kind of a secondary road, and I was at the stoplight, and my light was red, and I waited, and then my light turned green. And so I was making my way across the lanes to turn left into town. So remember, I'm in America, so I'm on the driver's side, which is on the left-hand side. And so I'm literally driving straight across where the oncoming traffic would be coming directly towards me. So I made it across the first few lanes, and then suddenly I looked left, and there was a car barreling towards me, obviously not going to stop for their red light. And it was in that moment that my entire world changed, because right then everything just slowed down. You know, you hear the stories and you're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Things literally just slowed down. It was like time bending. And this car is creeping now towards me. And suddenly I'm consciously aware, oh, you're getting ready to die. And it was no big deal. And it felt very much so like, oh, you've done this before. Just relax into it. No biggie. But you have a choice. Because that car is coming at you, you're either going to get smashed at a very high speed and directly into the driver's side door. And you can feel that, and then you can go, or you can go and watch it happen. And so I took option B, and there was at that moment this crazy drone. It was like I like to play Irish music. I play the baron, and so my favorite instrument would be the Ilian pipes. And I love when the piper is getting ready to play, because there's this drone as he's filling the bag with air and he's getting ready to play a tune. And it was like that. It was kind of a low, deep vibration. And so I was very aware of that vibration. And I've come to learn since, that is the lower vibration when our spiritual bodies or etheric light bodies are coming into a human body. We have to lower our frequency quite significantly in order to maintain attachment to the body. So I can hear this drone, everything speeds up, and I'm looking down, and suddenly I'm watching this car smash into the side of my car. And I see, that it was what we call a T-bone accident. So basically it folded my car in half. And it slams in. I'm looking down. I see my own head go through the driver's side window. And so it smashes the window out. The window broke out, which is lucky for me. I didn't slice my face up, but it did end up breaking my neck because it was a side impact. And so I'm watching as my head goes out, it comes back in. The seat folds up underneath me. There's glass everywhere. And I'm kind of looking, and I looked like a little puppet just sitting there. I was, of course, trapped in by the seatbelt. My body looks lifeless, and I can see blood coming out from where the shards of glass have gone into my legs. And I am watching this with the most peculiar, detached interest. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Wow. But I'm feeling nothing. And it was in that moment that I'm beginning to realize, wow, everything that I've just been conditioned to believe is actually not true. Because I grew up the daughter of a Southern Baptist minister. I had very strong teachings and ideas about what actually happens when we die. And none of that is happening in that moment. And I'm suddenly consciously aware that I am now an observer of my own passing. So I can still hear that drone in the background. I'm still watching. The car has spun all the way through the intersection. So you've got lanes of traffic in both directions have now come to a halt. Now people are getting out of their cars because they can obviously see that, I'm in bad shape there. And I'm watching people gather around the car, and strange things happened. Like I saw somebody come and put their phone number on the front seat of the passenger side of the car. The windows were all blown out. And she either didn't want to get involved or she had somewhere else to be, but wanted to leave her name and number as a witness. And so I watch her put that in there. And then eventually I watch a guy in uniform reach in through the passenger side and turn my engine off so the car doesn't explode. And so I'm kind of watching, and I'm just looking, and I'm not really feeling anything. And I'm certainly not going, oh no, my body is dead. It's nothing like that. I'm just observing. And so next thing, that drone, that low, steady drone starts to change. And it begins to elevate into the most beautiful set of tones, frequencies, sounds, this music of the spheres, I call it. And as that tone and that vibration begins to increase, I find myself slipping away from that scene. And so this is where an awful lot of people will talk about, oh, is that the tunnel of light? Well, I went so quickly, I didn't see any tunnel of light. I was there 1 minute watching the accident, and then the next thing I've landed in this other space. And this other space was still to this day, it's indescribable. I do the best that I can. It was an immediate sense of peace, an immediate sense of joy, an immediate sense of, oh, whew, I know where I am. I know what's going on. I belong here. And I'm just looking around. And what was so interesting is that the atmosphere there was palpable. So you could touch, it was like I could touch and manipulate the air. It looked like taffy. And what was I touching it with? I was touching it with a light body. I was still conscious of being in some kind of a form, not in a physical body, but in a formed light or energy body. And it's quite incredible because, you're just basking in that feeling. And this is where, you could go, gosh, I could sit like this forever. This is the best feeling in the world because I'm not thinking about anything so much. I'm just feeling. And this was when it really hit home that space, that world between worlds, that place that we go when we die. Heaven isn't a destination. It's a feeling. It's a vibration.
Yeah, this is something I've heard from a lot of people that have had out-of-body or near-death experiences. They say that you don't even realise that you've died, in inverted commas, because the spirit, the soul, is continuing on. It may have stopped animating the body, but it just continues on in a different form. So it can take someone a while to realise that they're actually no longer in the body, and they've moved on to the next stage. It's all continuous, and there's no linear time outside of this realm anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can imagine, from a little Christian girl from the Bible Belt of America, this is kind of a real big aha moment.
Yeah, it would be.
Because my feelings and my consciousness is completely intact. I know who I had just been. I was quite aware, that I was Mary-Helen, that I was 21 at the time of that accident. I knew everything that had happened to me in those 21 years, but suddenly I began to realize that I know an awful lot more. And it's like my awareness and my knowledge is expanding exponentially, just moment by moment. And as I am becoming more fully aware of who and what I really am, this is when I noticed that the atmosphere in front of me began to take shape. And so I always say I'd love to see the visual in a movie, the special effects on this, because it would just be so cool if I could adequately describe it to someone.
Right.
But it was like these two forms stepped forward, but they had been that palpable, textured atmosphere, and then suddenly they took shape and came forward towards me. Now, these two definitely gave the appearance of being male. They were older. The garment that they wore, I'm sure, was for my benefit because of having just, I'm freshly dead, so I'm a little bit shocked, and I'm looking at them, and they came in the easiest way to me. And so I'm kind of looking, and it was kind of that feeling of, gosh, I should know who you are, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And so they waited patiently. And then suddenly I realized, oh my gosh, you're my guardians. Oh, you're my guardians. We all have guardians. And the second that I remembered that, it all just came flooding back in. And I realized that these two in particular, while we have many that come in and out at different phases in our lifetime while here on earth, these two had been with me forever. Like, these were kind of my eternal watchdogs, if you like. And it was the best homecoming ever. You want to talk about an embrace with no arms. There's the energy of just being completely enveloped in someone's total acceptance and love and delight in seeing you. And yeah, that was it. Just, it changes you profoundly. Like, how can you be the same after something like that has happened?
Well, I can imagine it would. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your experience sounds quite similar in parts to that of a dude named Dannion Brinkley. Do you know that guy?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Yeah. So I interviewed him a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago. And his story was he was struck by lightning. Yes. In 1975. I think he was 25 years old. And he says he was struck by lightning and left his body. And he remembers looking down and seeing himself being taken to hospital and being laid out on a stretcher. And all the doctors there thought he had died. And he told me that during the time that he left his body, first of all, there was the shock of realizing what had actually happened because it was continuous and obviously his soul carried on. But he said to me, there's no judgment. There's no judgment when you cross over to the other side. There's no despotic, tyrannical God that looks back on your life and wags a finger at you and punishes you for all the things you've done wrong. Yeah, in actual fact, you judge yourself, is what he said.
Yes.
Your higher self judges the life that you've just come from.
Yeah, exactly. And judgment has gotten a really bad rap too over the years. It's taken on such a negative connotation. And judgment is really just a emotional state or a way of being that allows you to discern. It's like being, an insurance adjuster who can kind of go through and look at different possibilities and outcomes and give you a more factual kind of presentation of what's going on. And so when you're sitting there and you're in judgment of your own life, you're actually just observing. And this is where it got so interesting for me, because when these two beings came forward and, we'd done the big embrace and this homecoming, and it was wonderful, I moved immediately into this, the space of what we would call a life review. Now, what got so wild was it was like being in a 360 degree cinema. And I'm watching the events of my life play out, but I'm watching them simultaneously. So like I could look left and I could be a baby. I could look right and I'm 18, and I could look forward and I'm, losing my dog at the age of 12. And all of these things, as I'm watching them, are happening at the same time.
Wow.
And that consciousness that I was in that moment is totally okay with that and completely able to digest what's taking place in front of me. And this is where it really, really got cool about understanding what it means to have lived before. We talk about reincarnation or past lives, and this is where it really hit home. Oh, hang on, that stuff's all happening concurrently. It's not in linear time fashion. It's happening simultaneously. And so these elements of ourselves and these lives that we might remember or things from our past, it's all happening at the same time. That can be hard for, someone who is trapped in a body using 5 senses to digest. It's a brain melter, to be honest. But really, it's the best way I can describe it. It's like being on a merry-go-round. And if you're the observer and you're in the center of the merry-go-round and the merry-go-round is spinning and spinning, you can have, someone standing at north waving at you. And then you can have someone standing at south who's listening to the radio. And then you've got at east, you've got a dog wagging its tail. And if you got on the west, you've got a man serving ice cream, let's say. And as you're on that merry-go-round and you're going around and around, all of those things are happening simultaneously. And you're just observing them on this 360 tour around and around. And just because you're not seeing one as your merry-go-round whizzes past north, it doesn't mean that south isn't taking place.
Sure.
And that's kind of the best way I can describe. So suddenly I'm watching my life unfold all around me. And this is where you're kind of peeking around the corner and, very, very aware of the religious doctrine that I'd been raised in. I'm kind of going, all right, I've arrived in this space and Jesus didn't meet me at the gate. First of all, there wasn't a gate. And I'm like, okay, where are the clouds?
No sign of St. Peter.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, surely now the iconic God, the man with the white beard and the robe and all. Now we're going to get into judgment territory. Somebody's going to be, because I'd been told at this time, this is when it's decided whether you go up or you go down.
Yeah, or there'd be a fellow with a pitchfork and a red tail.
And so I'm in that kind of middle space, and I guess I'm like, I guess you have to watch your life first before that decision is made. And so I'm watching this, and I'm really taking interest and note in that as I'm watching my life unfold. It's like, oh gosh, that was really awesome what I just did there. That was so thoughtful. Wow, look at the ripple effect of what I did just there. And then there were these cringeworthy moments going, oh, okay, yeah, definitely I would do that differently next time.
Yeah, look at who that action harmed that I did.
And you're feeling it, but you're not feeling it in such a way that you're damning yourself. You're feeling it in a way of you're learning right in that moment. That is something, I don't like the way that feels. I don't like the way that made somebody else feel, and it's not an action that I will repeat. And so you're just as conscious and aware as you are as when you're in a body of how hurtful things you can do can be to other people, or how helpful things can be. And so as the observer now out of body, you're watching that with a very discerning eye going, okay, that was amazing. That was great. Yeah, that's the way to go with that. That I could have done better, but it's okay. And all the while, these two beings are sitting there just wrapping me in their love, and there's no sense of being judged whatsoever. It's me observing or judging my own experience in order to glean knowledge. And, as I learned at that stage, to either go back in and replicate or go back in and never, ever do again.
Now, what about people that have done obviously great evil in their lives in this world? You can think of somebody like George H.W. Bush, who recently passed away, or David Rockefeller, these elite types. Now, when they cross over to the other side, a lot of people in this life like to draw satisfaction from the idea that these people are going to face judgment and there's going to be retribution for all the great harm that they've done in their lives. But presumably they're going to undergo the same experience as everyone else. They're going to review their life from a higher perspective. They're not going to be judged. They're just going to experience what their actions caused. And, as their soul moves on, they're going to take that knowledge and that gained understanding with them, right? Which is probably not the best news for people that like to think of some sort of judgment awaiting these types of people.
But then you want to take that same person who is sitting and waiting for that kind of news and go, let's go through your life right now, sunshine, while you're alive. And let's pick out some of the moments where you might not have been as educated, or you had not yet developed the tools, and you did this and you did that. Do you really want me holding that against you? Because what you're doing is you're learning and you're growing, but B, you're also playing a role. And this is a very hard concept for people who have been badly hurt by somebody else to get their head around, that somebody could actually come in and play the role of the bad guy in order to create a series of circumstances that are going to ultimately learn to the growth and evolvement of that individual. Right. It's really hard because we like to be pissed off. We want to we want to hold somebody accountable. We love pointing a finger. Right.
That all comes from a human mind and a human ego, right? Which
absolutely,
we shed
and it's
when we get out of here.
Reinforced by religion. It's completely reinforced that there is a good and a bad. It buys into the whole duality concept of what Earth actually is. And, this is so interesting because one of the things that I learned during that time was that we spend so much time trying to change the schoolhouse. We're like, we want peace on earth. We want, we want less bad and more good. And what we fail to realize is that when we're making the decision to come to earth to incarnate, we're coming from a space of perfection. We are already that which we seek. We are divine alignment. We are completely at one with ourselves and with the multiverse in which we coexist. We are our own creators, and we go in and we set out a series of circumstances that are going to help us to know ourselves better, to understand what the human experience is all about. And so in order for that to take place, you can't have it all good all the time. And in order for everything not to be all good all the time, there's got to be somebody willing to put on that costume and play the role of the guy who's going to create havoc and harm and hurt and devastation and pain. And our rational minds then want to go, well, then he must suffer and pay. And I'm going, what if that is a greatly evolved soul that came in with an agreement to help you get better?
That's certainly a different way of looking at it all. A couple of years ago, I wrote down some burning questions that had been playing on my mind for quite some time. And every now and again, when I get into conversations with people, I drop this question on them and just try and get their response. And I think, if I remember correctly, I asked you this when we were together in Ireland. So I'm just going to read out the question as I termed it. And I think you pretty much answered it already. But my question was, with duality everywhere in nature and an inherent component in everything, would there always have to be evil and darkness in order for goodness and light to be experienced as the polar opposite of it? Is it therefore not possible for humanity to achieve its goals without there being suffering to counterbalance all the good stuff? And I went on to ask, if there wasn't this struggle against evil in life, how would we learn our lessons? What would be the point of incarnating here if it was all love and harmony for everyone? And as I say, I think you've pretty much just answered that.
Well, exactly. And, what's so interesting is if you really sit back and you look at it, what we spend most of our time trying to do is change the schoolhouse. And we keep saying that, we get caught up in, and which is good. Of course, it's good to be conscious and aware of the environment in which we live, Earth, the planet, the hologram, whatever you want to call it. It ain't going anywhere. It's been here forever and will continue on until such time that it doesn't need to any longer. And I think it's so comical that we actually think that we possess the power to destroy that. It will shake us off and begin anew far before we can destroy it. Does that mean that we're not consciously aware, that we don't recycle, or we're not aware of the type of power and energy that we utilize and that we deplete our sources here? Absolutely not. But rest assured that this place isn't going to just stop running just because we're so stupid. It's going to be quite the other way around. And we've seen it happen multiple times where Earth has shaken off civilizations, left, right, and center who had gotten out of control, unruly, and to the point where they destroyed themselves. And so I find it so funny how we're like, okay, it's Earth, we got to change Earth, we got to make peace on Earth, and they forget that it starts with the people, the inhabitants. And so again, it's that outside in approach where we're going and trying to change the schoolhouse rather than ourselves. The whole point being that the schoolhouse is here for us to learn to change.
So if everything is a choice, if you choose peace and love and harmony, then you can choose to stay in the spirit realm. But if you choose to incarnate here, it's because you want the challenges and you want to overcome the obstacles and you want these opportunities for growth that you can only get by incarnating into human form. You wouldn't get those in other realms. Exactly,
which is where everybody then goes, what's the point? If I come from that wonderful space, why on earth would I do that? And I just finished writing in my latest book a whole chapter to try and explain that. Ask anybody that you know who is a thrill seeker. And we all have them in our lives. The one who, that mad one who loves to go and jump out of an airplane with a parachute, or that one who loves to jump off a bridge with a bungee cord around their ankle and, yank their body up and down. And the rush, the thrill, the adrenaline, when they describe, you can't understand what it feels like until you go do it. And then, and then somebody goes and does it. And, it's really popular over here in Ireland to do these fundraisers, and people go jumping out of airplanes, and they're 50 years old. Okay, I'm jumping for cancer. I'm jumping for my brother, or I'm doing whatever. And then they come back, and every time, without a doubt, they'll go, that was the most amazing thing I've ever done in my life. And the reason they can resonate with that is because it's so different to what they usually are in their everyday lives. And so I used the example of, if you had in your home, you had this great big fantastic TV and a big surround sound system and a really comfortable armchair, and you've got a fridge full of food, and you've got your remote control and your favorite movie. And you're watching that movie, and you are totally in it. You're able to pause it when you need to go to the toilet, and you can get up and get yourself a beer, or you can go and you're listening to this high definition sound and this explosion of color on this fantastic TV that you're watching. Why would you ever leave home and go to the cinema? Well, the phone rings. A friend that you don't get to see that often calls you up, and they're like, hey, such and such movie is out and let's go see it. And you're like, yes. And the excitement, the anticipation, and you get to the cinema and you walk in. The first thing that hits you is the smell of popcorn, and there's people and there's a buzz, and everybody's there because they want to be there and they've chosen to be there, and there's pleasure there. And you go into that movie, and regardless of whatever it is, if it's it's a comedy, you're laughing along with everybody else. If it's a tearjerker, you see people sniffing and trying to hide their tears. People are having a drink, enjoying their popcorn, and it's a whole different experience. Which one of them is more valid, the one at home or the one in the cinema?
Yep.
You got me?
Yep, I see that. Now, people will say, if we choose what lives and circumstances to incarnate into, why would anyone possibly choose life in a war zone as a child in Gaza or bloody Yemen or something, with bombs raining down on their home every night, or as a satanic ritual abuse victim, or as someone who's severely disabled and spends their life in a wheelchair, etc. But I guess when people make those observations, they're doing it again from the limitations of a human mind. We're thinking,
Correct.
We're thinking with the limitations that have been placed on us rather than from our higher perspectives, all-seeing,
and the higher
all-knowing.
perspective and that place of all-knowing is where you made the choice. And see, that's the thing. So when people say, I would never choose that, well, of course you wouldn't, because who you are right now is that unlimited divine being who's been stuffed inside of a meat suit, hands tied behind your back with 5 senses, and that's it. Of course you wouldn't choose that kind of pain.
Right.
And that's why you don't make that choice when you're in the body. And that's why I get tickled when I hear people go, oh yeah, well, this is it. If we come back, I'm never coming back here. The second somebody says that, I know they're coming back, because I know they have yet to learn that that's not who they really are.
Well, that's bad news for me, because I make the statement.
Are you one of them?
I'm never coming
back again.
No, I make the statement many times to my wife and others that to hell with this. When I'm out of this place, I'm never coming back. Why would I want to do this again? That's the way I feel about it. I mean,
it's so funny. After having been dead, I say the exact opposite. I like it here. Because I know how this works, and I know that nothing can actually harm who I really am. Yeah, you can hurt my physical body, you can hurt my feelings or whatever, but who I really am, I'm untouchable, and so are you. And so it's a lot easier to navigate the ups and the downs, or if somebody says an unkind word, or if somebody, or if my bills are overdue or whatever, I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's okay. I'll find a way through this. And that's quite the challenge. I love finding the resolutions and the solutions and knowing that I made it, because it's my eternal destiny doesn't depend on what I accomplish while I'm here inside that limited form.
Right. So when you had this out-of-body experience, were you able to intuit anything about your own past lives, or were you just reviewing your life as Mary-Helen?
Oh, absolutely, because this is when I'm all of a sudden, oh yeah, I've lived before. Because now remember, at 21 and growing up the way that I did, I don't even know if I knew the word reincarnation or the idea that there was even a group of people who thought that you could live. I wasn't that educated about that, Now, having said that, what was interesting is, talk about your duality. I had grown up constantly being spoken to and visited by my grandfather, who had died when I was 1. And so he was a major influence on my life, and still is, all the way through. Yet when push comes to shove, there you are, you're dead, and suddenly you've forgotten that you've had that experience going on all the way through your life, yet you've never applied it to yourself. It doesn't it doesn't even faze me that I've got this dead guy in front of me who's talking to me and is very much an active part of my life. I didn't ever conceptualize of, I wonder, did he live before, or did I live before? Or, it just was what it was, there he was. And suddenly I'm in this space going, oh my gosh, we live as many times as we want to here. Oh, and there's other places to live. Oh yeah. And it's like a big remembering. You're always going, oh yeah. Oh, I remember that. And it's just this amazing moment you can only imagine, where just everything is revealed.
Wow. Yeah, you remember who you are. You're not discovering it for the first time. You're remembering.
No, you're remembering.
You've just been caused to forget.
Yes, exactly. And that's the really interesting part of it. So, why don't we know that? Why? Well, there'd be so much less suffering if we walked around knowing that we were connected to our higher selves all the time. And I'm like, what's the point of being here?
Yeah, we're back to that again.
Yeah, if the duality of being here is to simultaneously experience joy and heartache, elation and complete distress at the same time. And you're like, do we do that? Yeah, think about it. You could have, the birth of a child happening at the same time that you're losing your home. You could have an accident that leaves you wheelchair bound at the same time that your daughter is walking down the aisle to get married. We have this amazing opportunity here where we have the capacity to experience such a broad spectrum of emotions simultaneously.
Just in terms of terminology, just before I move on, what is the difference between a spirit and a soul as you understand it? Because we hear these terms used, and is there a difference between the two?
I think it's just semantics, to be honest. It's words are so funny because, of course, depending on who's using them and if there's any kind of religious connotation to it, or if there's any kind of, someone's personal experience, someone could say a spirit. And what is a spirit? It's that which animates the human incarnate. So is it the spirit or the essence of that soul that lives afterwards? Yeah. So is there actually a difference between a spirit and a soul? No.
Yeah.
What we're generally describing when we talk about that is that spark of life, that rivulet of energy that animates the human form, that when the physical body dies, moves on to another place.
Yeah, it's immortal.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll call it a soul then. So at what stage might a soul decide that it's learned all it needs to here in this low-density 3D reality, and it's ready to get on out of here for good? Do you feel you need to reach a particular form of spiritual enlightenment or an embracing of certain truths? Or
no, it's always a choice.
You can just decide at any time,
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
Yeah. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. That's the thing. That's the important bit, is understanding that you're, because we've gotten so good at placing omnipotence outside of ourselves. We love to create a God. There's God on the other side that's calling all the shots. We're part of all of that energy. So we're creating these experiences as we go along. And, we want to, it's easy to place blame and not take responsibility for something when we've got someone else to hold accountable for it. Thus the need for separation and creating God and man. It's been said, it's been alluded to in so many different religious texts that we are that. We already are that. Yet we like to continue to, try to control one another by creating that sense of separation. And so you have, at any stage in the incarnation cycles, what I experienced there was that when a soul or spirit is coming in and incarnating in the earthly cycles, they don't tend to jump out of that, go somewhere else, and then come back in. We tend to kind of stick with this program until we feel like we've exhausted it or that we've taken from it what we need.
So me saying in this human form as Mark, I've got no interest in coming back to this place, I want to be out of here. You're saying that when I cross over and, re-access my higher self and become... You
might rethink that.
Yeah, I might look back and think, no, actually, there's more I want to experience. There's more I want to learn. So I definitely want to go back and, grow and evolve further.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which I would not be saying as Mark, but I would be saying that in my higher self.
Right. Well, you've got kids who are in school, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, have you ever had the experience where you pick one of them up at school and they get into the car and they're like, I hate school. I don't ever want to go back in there.
Daily.
I had to nearly push one out of the car this morning who did not want, I just don't want to be here today. I don't want to do this.
Yep.
And I look like a cartoon nearly, with my foot on her side and pushing her out the door. Get out.
Yeah.
And, and that's quite a natural reaction because, school's hard and it doesn't make sense so often in the way that we educate ourselves and the limitations we place on how we can learn, and that we expect everybody learns the same way. And then the ones in school who aren't learning the same way, we put a label on because they're not learning like everybody else. And now they're disruptive, or now they've got ADHD, or now they're this or that, and so these kids, they know that it's messed up. And yet, because we're conforming to the world that we live in at this present moment, we have to send them there anyway, unless we choose to homeschool or whatever. So there I am pushing my daughter, who's a very beautiful, highly evolved soul who gets it most of the time. And she's like, I don't want to be in there today. And, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel good. And yet there's a part of us that knows that whatever's waiting for her inside of there is also going to help. And it might have nothing to do with what she learns from a teacher. It could be that interaction she has with that bully. It could be that kid that she stands up for at the lunch table. It could, knowing that there's going to be something in the experience of the day that's going to serve her in some way. But that doesn't mean that she's really excited about being in that schoolhouse.
Yep. What about fears and phobias that people have? These can be carried over from one life to the next, right? So
indeed, they can.
You might have a very irrational phobia. So my youngest daughter is terrified of small dogs. Now, she's okay with big dogs. So a bloody great, Labrador or something, no problem. But a little poodle, she's terrified of it, and she leaps up and in absolute fear. So I'm wondering where that comes from. Could that be a memory
carried over from somewhere else? Yes.
From a past life. And also, not only fears and phobias, but what about fetishes? These weird kind of, attractions to things that people have. Presumably, these could all be memories carried over from previous experiences.
Absolutely. And see, when you think about that and you break it down, Mark, and you're like, okay, what actually is a memory? A memory is, and like you and I are sitting here. I'm sitting in the car park of a hotel talking to you on my phone. You're sitting in your home and you're in your little studio and you're talking there. That's us in present time. Okay. My memory of having been at my house half an hour ago isn't because I'm still sitting at my house half an hour ago. It's because it's left a cellular imprint. It's left that action that took place then has left a footprint. And that footprint is coming via a vibration or a frequency. So my memory or my frequency of having been in my house half an hour ago is now resonating inside of me sitting here in present time. So you can have things that happen in this lifetime or in other lifetimes where you had an experience or a memory and it leaves its footprint or its cellular impression, its cellular memory. And you can get triggered in this lifetime. It's like your daughter with the small dog. And it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. You can have somebody who is perfectly healthy. And all of a sudden get some kind of ailment or illness that has zero medical backing in this present reality. Nobody can figure out where it comes from. It's not making sense. It doesn't match. The bloods don't match, whatever. And it can be a cellular memory or impression. When I was practicing as a chiropractor, I remember this specifically once where this lady came to me and she had, she had just had whatever kind of back thing going on. And so she got her very first chiropractic adjustment. And I get this phone call from her that evening, and she said, can I come back in and see you tomorrow? I have something to show you. And I said, sure. So she'd had her spine adjusted for the first time. She arrives in the next day, and she pulls her trousers down. And on the front of her thigh, there is a hoof print. And I mean a perfect hoof print. And I was like, oh, my God, what in the world? And she goes, I got kicked there by my horse, who was no longer with us, 20 years ago. And by adjusting her spine, opening up that nervous system, somehow her body felt that it needed to release that imprint. And so there we were looking at the same bruise in the same shape of that hoof print from 20 years earlier. So this can happen between lifetimes as well, where a cellular impression is made from an experience, be it positive or negative. And we've all had that happen where we've gone to a location and gone, God, I know I've been here before, but you haven't.
Oh, yeah.
Or you've heard a piece of music and it just like sets your soul on fire and you're like, why? What in the world?
That's what deja vu is, right?
Yeah, that resonance with a time period. Like if you walk into my mom's house right now, everything is turquoise. Everything is turquoise and everything is Japanese. Now, my mother has never been anywhere near Japan, but every ornament, all the wall hangings, the paintings, everything is Japanese. And if you go, Mom, why is that? Why is everything in our whole house Japanese when you've never been there? And she's like, I don't know. I just like it. And that's what we're talking about, where somebody has a throwover or a carryover from something. And so, of course, it can go into, difficult experiences as well. I wrote just recently in this new book about a lady who came to me, and she'd been a normal woman. Everything was fine. No problems. She had kids, a husband she loved. They traveled. His family lived in, I don't know, Scotland or Wales. And they used to travel there all the time to see his family. And then all of a sudden she pulls up to school one day, drops her kids at the gate, and she can't get out of the car. And they're like, aren't you going to walk us to the gate? And she's like, no, I'm going to stay here. And she can't get out of the car. Well, the next day she notices that when she drives, she has to stop at the shop, and she parked the car right in front of the shop door so that she could see the car so she could make her escape if something happened. And so her behavior starts changing quite suddenly, and she's getting very concerned. And so her family can't figure out what's going on. And now it moves from she couldn't let the kids out and walk them to the gate to now she's not going to get into the car and go. So you've got this otherwise perfectly normal, healthy, who's had no trauma. Nothing has just happened that's bad that would cause this. It was sudden and overnight, and now she is housebound. So by the time her mother approached me, she had been in her own home, this young mother of kids and has a husband, 2 solid years. And they cannot figure. They've tried, does she have depression? They tried to put every label on it you could name. And medicate or whatever people had, the doctor had to call to the house. She couldn't go in. It was this complete phobia of going outside with this unrelenting fear that she was going to come to harm. So it was so interesting when her mom said, it's going to be a miracle if we can get her into your office because she hasn't been out of the house. Well, her family went and surrounded her. And I mean, surrounded her and walked her out of the house in this tight little circle, put her into the car, and then got her to my office, walked her into the office. She is surrounded by this entourage, and she's freaking out. So she gets into the office, and once she's in the office, she's okay. And she's sitting there, and she says, I don't know what on earth you think you're going to do for me in an hour. And I said, well, let's just see. Let's see what happens. And so part of my ability, and this, comes from the whole being dead thing, is when I place my hands on somebody, I can kind of see the history. I can see what's going on there. So she's on the table. I put my hands on, and then whoosh, I get this unbelievable smell of alcohol, unbelievable stench. And next I'm seeing a movie in my mind, and I see this very overweight woman with, stab wounds all over her body. She's sitting in the bottom of a stairwell, and her skirts are pulled up over her head, and she's covered in stab wounds, and she's obviously been murdered. And I'm like, oh my God, and now you got this petrified woman on the table, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be a little bit dodgy, trying to tell her, yeah, you were murdered in the stairwell. And, but it was interesting when we started to talk about it. She really resonated with it. And she goes, gosh, I feel really sorry for her. And she goes, oh, well, I guess it's me you're talking about. Yeah, that's awful. And we connected in that moment with what had happened to that woman. And even though she didn't have any memory of it in this lifetime, she was able to empathize with this woman that I was describing to her. So next thing, she picks up her shoes, and we're done. And she walks out to my waiting room, and we're chatting, and she's like, that's so bizarre. Well, oh, well, I guess you tried, but, and that's weird that came up, but yeah, I don't know. And so she's tying her laces, and she comes over, she gives me a hug, and she's like, look, thanks for trying anyway. I appreciate it. And out she walks out the front door, right? By herself. She's walking down the footpath. She gets to the car. Her mom's jaw is dropped sitting in the car because she has never walked anywhere on her own in these last 2 years. And she walks, turns around, she waves, gets into the car, and they drive past, and they're all staring at me as I'm standing at the door going, oh my God, what just happened? But the one thing that she'd said had been really interesting. As she was tying up her laces, she goes, God, that story is so weird. It sounds like Jack the Ripper or something, doesn't it? And I was just like, oh my God, my hair was standing on end. And I immediately, the second that she had left, I got onto the computer and I started Googling the name of the lady because it was very distinct. The name of the lady had come up. Her name was Martha Tabram. And the voice, as it was talking to me and telling me about this woman and the history, it explains that at the same age Martha Tabram had been murdered, some kind of a trigger, because this woman hit the same age, something triggered in her body, you're getting ready to die.
Right.
And that was all it took. It was the age. Some people it can be a location, some people it can be a smell, some people it can be a sound. It was the age in this circumstance, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh. And so the further I look into Martha Tabram, now she wasn't one of the, what they call the canonical five, the five murders of Jack the Ripper. But she was under investigation because her murder had taken place 3 weeks earlier than the first noted Jack the Ripper murder.
Wow.
And they were investigating her, and still are, I think, to see if she wasn't actually his first victim. And so she made that blasé comment, God, it sounds like Jack the Ripper. And I wasn't even thinking Jack the Ripper because I didn't see any Jack the Ripper. I just saw her after the fact, stabbed in that stairwell.
I thought the same thing, because you recounted this anecdote at your Ireland
Yes.
presentation, and I was sat there in the audience, and when you started, I thought to myself, well, this sounds just like Jack the Ripper. And then you
Yep.
came out with the punchline at the end.
Yeah. And so it was just crazy. But these are some examples of what can happen. I mean, you're talking about a 36, 37-year-old woman who is, yesterday buying her own groceries, and then the next day can't leave her own home. That's how big this stuff can be. So, yeah, it plays a huge impact. And, I made a very careless statement many years ago. And for God's sakes, after all the things that I have seen in this world and out of it, you would think I'd be more careful. But someone had asked me years ago, oh, do you think past lives have anything to do with who we are? And I was like, nah, no, it might play a small part. But, we've got so much to deal with in our current lives, just totally fobbed it off. And we've got so much to deal with now. I don't know why we would do that or whatever. Well, then every session after that, for I don't even know how long, every session after that was somebody coming in with a past life thing. And it was like, yeah, let's show you. You think you know everything? Yeah. And so I saw some of the most remarkable. That's why I just wrote this book, because the first half of it is all of these bizarre cases where people just had this exorbitant fear or these phobias or, like you said, these fetishes, these propensities towards things, and they weren't coming from this lifetime.
Now, this is probably going to be a controversial one for certain people. They might get triggered, but whatever. Just asking the question. Can homosexuality, people who turn out to be homosexual or lesbian, could that be explained by a soul not having fully shaken off the energy of its gender in a previous life? So if you've been a woman several times over and now you're coming in as a man, but you don't fully make that energetic transition over into a male body and a male experience, could that explain why some people turn out to be homosexual?
It's not so much explain it. It's one of many possibilities. It's, like I have a very dear friend. I call him my gay twin, and we speak together a lot in the States, and he'd be the first to tell you he had a near-death experience. And he was very aware that far more of his lifetime experiences here on earth had been as a woman as had been as a man. And so while he's in a male body this time, he just resonates with the more feminine energy. And so he's really consciously aware of that. And so, it's fascinating. And then there are other people, I think, who that's part of a conscious choice, that they'll come in. I can recall a family where I grew up. And of course, again, remember, we're in Southern Baptist territory, and it's in the Bible Belt. And these people were deeply, deeply religious, and their daughter was lesbian, and they did everything to cover it up, everything to hide it, everything to, and she had to move away so that she could live out her authentic self. But she created such a sense of, like, they had to learn. These who would sit in judgment because of their religious doctrine of other people's experiences or other people's children now had to have it in their own family because they loved her. And they were like, I'm in such conflict because, she's this way and I don't believe in this way, yet I still love her. So you can see the soul that would come in and take on that persona in order to create those lessons of growth and understanding for her family members who needed to evolve more in that area.
It's like the jokes you often hear about if you have a white supremacist kind of right-wing leaning National Front guy who hates people of colour. Guess who his daughter is going to end up dating one day?
Oh, totally.
One day
Guess who's coming to dinner?
Yeah. She's going to come home with a black guy one day, and that guy, the dad is going to have to deal with that because that's something he needs to learn to address.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
And these things happen all the time.
Oh, they do, of course, and it, being raised in my household, and it wasn't because of religion, it was because of personal choice. There was no alcohol in our house. My dad was a health nut. My mom just chose that's not something that she wanted part of her life. But because of the lifestyle they'd chosen for themselves, rather than just kind of letting it be what it was, it had a tendency to steer towards alcohol was a bad thing. Alcohol was, that's something, alcohol is a tool like any other thing that we find here on earth. It has the potential to create massive growth and lessons for the people who use it or abuse it. And like anything out there. And so because they made it such a thing, what was, I'm going off visiting colleges. What was the first thing I did when I got out of the house? I got so drunk that I was at a party and in a situation where I was unable to take care of myself because I was so drunk, and I ended up getting raped. Now, does that happen every time somebody gets drunk? No, of course not. But this was my parents' worst nightmare. And they thought that if by drilling into us that we, alcohol is bad, you don't do that because these bad things can happen. Sure. What was I going to do? Only come in and bring that lesson into the house. Do you know? Yeah. So I'm able to look at that and, I can talk to you about being raped. Like I can talk about my toast I ate this morning. It has no emotional charge for me because it was so obvious to me on a soul level that was part of the experience, A, to help them, and B, to help the countless other people that I've helped with that experience and being able to let go of the charge connected to it. It has nothing to do with my identity. I don't wear it as a badge. It's one of a zillion experiences that I've had here. Yet we tend, we love to catastrophize everything, and it's, oh, this happened to me, therefore I can't be this, and this. It's a great excuse not to be excellent. And people get caught in that wheel, and it's a real thing for them where something traumatic, an abuse of some type, done to them by another human being, becomes suddenly a place where they go and they retreat and they never come out of it again. And so, that's why we create these lessons for one another. And so anyone who sits in judgment, it's comical. Because it's kind of like when you were talking before about like George Bush, and you were talking about the Rothschilds and all this, and then, but like, where's the cutoff point for the crime? So if I went into the corner store that's a mom and pop shop, and this was their bread and butter and their livelihood, and I went in there and I stole from them just a couple of steaks, is that a worse crime than these bigger level crimes that we see? Where is the cutoff? Because the energy of it is the same. I've just taken from somebody from their hard work and what they've done. And so why is that any less of a crime? Or why is it easier to go, sure, look, it's not as bad as blah, blah, blah. It's so funny how we think that we are so superior that we can judge one thing as better or worse than another in someone else's life experience.
It's the human ego again.
Totally.
Either way, I can imagine George Bush's life review probably made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre look like Mary Poppins. Yeah. I can't imagine it was much fun.
No, I could say so. And yet there are people out there who would describe their knowing of him and loving of him in a completely different light.
George Bush Jr. Said he was a wonderful father, which is an interesting perspective.
But maybe he was, and this is what's so neat. And this is why I wrote a story in this new book that I've done, about a young girl who goes off to secondary school. And this is a true story, goes to secondary school. And within weeks, she's being bullied by this new group of boys, and she's being badly bullied. Like what they're saying is horrible. And so, her parents go into the school, they're talking to the principal, and the principal is not taking them seriously because there's no bullying in my school. She had a real chip on her shoulder because bullying was not tolerated on her watch, but it was happening. And so rather than addressing it, she systematically and categorically started wearing the child who was being bullied down into thinking that there was something wrong with them. She's looking for attention. There's possibly a psychological issue going on here, and it was insidious what the principal of the school was doing to this child. And the parents kept going in, and they're like, "Could you please just move her out of that classroom?" "No, we're not going to do that." Everything happening. And so this is from September to the Christmas, and then the night before they were to go back to school, the child tries to hang herself, and the principal then, of course, is like, "See, we told you she's psychologically damaged. There's something else going on there." Not realizing, well, of course, realizing that she had been contributing to that problem. But what I explained was, as the child, after moving through and surviving the hanging experience, this child has evolved and grown into this very self-aware, dynamic individual, and who can look back at that experience now and go, "Wow, that was literally the making of me." And you sit down, and if I were to I was actually, when I was interviewing this family, I was speaking to a friend of theirs who happened to be a neighbor of that principal. Oh my God, she's wonderful. She'd give you the shirt off her back. She's amazing. Her kids adored her, thought she was fantastic. And I knew some of her friends through this family who thought she was an absolutely incredible person. So there again, we've got the duality for the family, for their purposes, my subjects of this story, for their purposes, the role that principal played was pure evil and malice. And they can't even digest the idea that someone could turn around and say that she was so overwhelmingly kind. To her family, who doesn't know her that way, she's an absolute angel. She loves them. She's attentive. She's caring. She's loving. She's been a wonderful mother. And therein lies our duality. So which one do we judge her on? Which story is more relevant? Yeah, it's a lot to chew on.
It just makes you realize that this life experience is a game, and we're all playing roles. We're all playing parts in this big game. You got it. And most of the time, we don't even realize that we're just playing these roles.
Come on. Mark, have you never been talking to somebody who started speaking about someone and they were like, "My God, that guy is such an asshole." And and you're going, "Are we talking about the same person?"
Right.
Do you know? Because I think he's fantastic. Oh, I think he's very well, he's so connected and he's so switched on. He's,
right. Well, people tell me they love my work and they think I'm doing a great job. And then in the next message, somebody will tell me I'm an arsehole. So, yeah, It happens to everyone.
Yeah. So, you can see it when you break it down. It's always happening on the micro. With the macro, it's here in nature. Like you said, duality is everywhere we look. And so why would it stop with our experience here? Because that's what this place is about. It's about being able to find that way. If you ask any Southern Republican about George Bush, they're going to tell you some wonderful things, and that their experience as a citizen of the United States of America under his presidency was a positive and wonderful thing. Upstanding gentleman, someone who's all into the whole military thing, and that they think that that's some kind of badge of honor that that you served and you did this or whatever, based on what their criteria of a good life lived. He really cut the mustard for a whole lot of people. And then there are other people who happen to know other things that he was involved in, or who are like, "Oh my God, that's a spawn of Satan."
It's a whole different way of looking at things.
It certainly is.
I'm fascinated by how free will and consent is everywhere, and I plan to put together a presentation to take out on the road this year, just looking at the concepts of free will and how it's inherent in creation. And not only do we see it playing out in this physical realm, but it would appear that free will is there on a soul level as well, as we already discussed, whereby you choose to incarnate into these bodies and come into these lives. To what extent will our lives have been predetermined then? Because we also have free will. and it's our greatest gift, and it has to be present, because if we didn't have free will, we would just be automatons, robots, wandering around, carrying out tasks that had already been predetermined. So there's got to be variables which come from free will, the decisions that we make in the moment, and it could go either way depending on what we choose. So we must be looking at a kind of interplay between what's been predetermined and where we still possess the ability to shape the experiences we have by the decisions that we make as we go along. So would it be the case that we decide major things like where in the world we're going to be born, who our parents are going to be, what job we're going to do, that kind of thing, but then the smaller details are open to free will?
Well, all of the details are open to free will, but from my experience and having, like I was mentioning to you before, I had that interaction all my life with my grandfather. And when I started showing all these signs of like dreaming things and they would come true, and I'd know when somebody was going to die, when I was about 11, I lost my English bulldog, Otto von Bismarck. There's another throwback for you. Why does an 11-year-old name a dog Otto von Bismarck? Are you serious? And I had 3 of them, by the way, 3 Ottos. And so when I lost my first dog, I was so devastated. And I remember saying to my grandfather, because now I would know, like, Mrs. Jones down the street's going to die on Tuesday. And, these things were starting to become real in my life. And so I started getting very worried about my parents. And I'm like, okay, as this unfolds and all this is going on, I can't be sitting around waiting for the rest of my life to be getting the phone call or the news that one of my parents has dropped dead. And I made a choice as a child, and I asked Judge to tell me when my mother and father were going to die, because it was such a part of what I was becoming to know this kind of information. I felt like I would be better knowing when they were going to go. And so he agreed. And so my dad died exactly when and how. And my mom, she'll be 90 in May, and I know when she goes. And so, I spend the most glorious times with her now, because
Damn,
I know what
have
kind
you
of
told
timeline
her?
I'm on.
Have you shared that with her?
I would not know ever. No,
good. Okay.
No. And so it's interesting that, you can have your entrance planned, you can have your exit planned. But what I came to realize that we have what I call portals of exit. And portals of exit are if you have set down a list of criteria that you want to accomplish while you're here on Earth. And let's say you're a real go-getter and you're an overachiever, and you have ticked all of the boxes that you came here for. And then you're kind of going, oh, okay. There are opportunities. There's the accident. There's the illness. There's the sudden death or whatever, where we have what's called a portal of exit, where if you're done, you can opt out. It's like taking the exit off to the rest stop on the highway.
Wow.
You can have set in stone where your beginning and your end are going to be, but you also have clauses, options that you put in place for yourself if you're ready to go. And then some people will get to a portal of exit and they will sincerely and genuinely go, I'm not finished. I am not finished. And they'll stay. And you'll see this happen oftentimes with people who are taking, are being a bit careless with their lives, who aren't acknowledging how precious the gift of life is, who are, casually saying that couldn't care less if I wake up or not, or whatever. Oftentimes you'll see them come to a choice point where there is a portal of exit, and suddenly in that moment they'll go, okay, oh, no, it is precious. You see a lot of turnaround points there where people will continue to live when faced with the option to die.
Wow. You put it all so well, and I personally find it quite comforting to listen to this information, Other people might find it a bit traumatic or a bit scary, but it answers so many questions for me. It answers more questions than it raises, and it brings me a certain amount of calm and comfort to understand that this is what we really are. Is this something you can talk to kids about, would you say? If your kids are having problems, if they tell you they hate their lives, they're not having a good time here, can you try to help them to understand why they're having certain experiences by talking to them about this kind of stuff?
Absolutely. I've been talking to my kids about this since they were old enough to talk about it. And, I wrote a book for children called The Chakra Fairies that taught them how to utilize the concept of a chakra fairy going through and how important it is to clear the system. So if you teach the child what, through the fairies and through the chakras, what self-worth and value is, how it is to be a good listener, how it is to love and receive love equally as important. It's great that you can give, but you got to be able to receive too. And going through these concepts, and I use these little fairies so that they would go and have a method each night before they went to bed of working through and clearing themselves out so that they woke up fresh and new, realizing that they have a brand new start every single day and that they have the option to create anew every single day. So I think it's desperately important to talk to kids about this kind of stuff. I also have an awful lot of families who land on my doorstep where they have a child who's either attempted suicide or is currently suicidal. And you wouldn't, half the time you think you get locked up for saying it out loud, but I don't care. I always tell them the truth about death. I always tell them, look, if you choose to do this, this is your option, and guess what's going to happen? Compared to you and the guy who died of cancer or you and the guy who died in the car accident, you're going out the same way and you're going to go through the same process and you're not going to end up burning in the fires of hell. But what is going to happen when you do realize, if it's not a soul plan suicide, as in you consciously chose to come in here and create that exit for the growth and benefit of those around you. If this is a suicide by overwhelm.
Right, that would be a free will decision rather than a predetermined one.
Correct. And if you took a suicide by overwhelm, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go, you're going to lift out, you're going to go into that space I described where I met those two beings. You're going to sit in that wonderful light and you're going to look at your life, and then you're going to go, well, shit, I didn't finish everything I needed to do. I actually wanted to do this and I bit off more than I could chew. So I'm actually going to go back in. I'm going to choose a different set of circumstances. I'm going to go into a different place, but I'm eventually going to have to work myself back to the same feeling and choose differently. And I'm like to the kid, dude, if you know that's how that works out, let's take a little evaluation here. You're in a nice house. You got a family who actually really cares about you. You're educated. You have food on the table. And you might choose to put yourself in a different scenario once you get out of this. So I'm like, is it bad enough to where you can't work your way through it, knowing that you've got it pretty good where you are right now? Can you find a way through this? I've never lost one. They just want honest truth. It's like the eulogy I gave at a man's funeral, and all of his friends. He was in his 90s, so the only few friends that were still around to be at his funeral. When I gave this eulogy, I told them what happens when they die, and there were some jaws dropped in that audience. But the men came up to me afterwards, his friends, and just hugged me, and said of all their years sitting through funerals and doing things, going to church and all this, and people gave them these nice parables and these, little Bible passages and all of this, but no one had actually ever told them what happens. And as one guy said, look, it's right around the corner for me. I'm 94 years old. And he said, thank you for telling me what happens.
Sure.
People just want to know the truth.
It's not a conversation you hear had every day.
It is not.
I'm going to make this the last question because I know you've got to get off fairly soon. But if we go back to your car accident and we take that in isolation, it's not just your life that was affected by the event that you chose to be a part of. You got the old guy, the other motorist, his life would have been affected too. The lives of his immediate family would have been affected by what happened, and your immediate family. So when you come in, it's not in isolation. There's going to be a cooperative agreement entered into with other souls.
Absolutely.
Where you all share certain experiences and you all draw different things from it. So it's done on a collective group basis.
Correct. And you can have what I would call B players. So you could have members of your own soul group who are going to be more intertwined with your immediate life. And then you have what we call a B player, which is the guy who hit me. I wasn't part of his life before it, nor was I part of it afterwards. But boy, did he turn up at exactly the right time to help perpetuate this event.
Right.
And so that's someone who's happens to be, yeah, you know what? I'll be down there at the same time and I'll be in that location. And if you need me to carry this out for you, I'll do that for you. That's a B player.
And someone who is your husband in one life could be your daughter in the next.
Correct and right. Absolutely.
And there's a guy called Brian Weiss. I'm sure you know about him.
Sure. Yeah, I know Brian well.
I looked into some of his work, and he does counselling sessions with people, past life regressions. Mm-hmm. And he was talking to this one woman, I recall, and she went back into a past life experience and re-experienced her death at the hands of an enemy in military combat or something like that, some kind of battle. And she
Catherine was her name. Yes.
Right. And she realised that the person that had murdered her in this battle was the partner that she was currently with in this life.
Correct.
How crazy is that?
Well, listen, I'll leave you with this little tidbit. When I was, when my father was dying, now look, I do this stuff for a living. I've been doing it all my life. And you love to think that you practice what you preach all the time, but sometimes we just fall prey to that whole human thing. And I'm very much so when I'm talking to people about loved ones who are passing, listen, sometimes it's not you who's meant to be by their bedside. Because some people carry great guilt that they weren't there. Exactly who was meant to be there is going to be there. And this is why someone could be holding vigil 24/7 and then they go get a cup of coffee and the person dies. Everyone has had that kind of an experience. And so what was really interesting when my father was dying and I was sitting there for weeks, I had come home from Ireland. I was in America. I'm sitting next to his bed. 6 weeks had gone by. I went home one night. It was very, very, very late. And I get into bed. I go to sleep. I start tossing and turning. I wake up and I'm shrieking. And my mom comes flying into the room and she's like, "What's going on?" I couldn't even speak. And I went, I can't say it. I just can't. Went in, splashed some water on my face, went back to sleep. 30 minutes later, boom, I'm up again and I'm freaking out. And so I told my mom I'd tell her in the morning. And so the next morning I get up and I said, "Mom, I saw this man and it was at least 10,000 years ago. And he was on the ground. He was wearing a tartan. He had a huge big black head of hair with straw and mud matted in it. He was badly wounded just below the knee. And he was dying of like septicemia. He was Celtic. And I was standing there. I could look down my own body. I could see my shoes my feet were wrapped in like skins for shoes. And I could see the tartan on me, and I'm looking at him, and he's speaking to me in Gaelic. And in this vision, I can understand exactly what he's saying. And he turns to me, and he rolls over. He's dying, and I'm crying and crying. "Please go, go on, go to your maker, let yourself free." And I'm yelling. And he turns to me, and he puts his hand out, and he says, "Leave me, woman. This death is mine alone." And I'm looking at my father, and I tell my mom this, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you got to get out of here. You're the one holding Dad back." And we were like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You can't just drive down the road. You've got to leave, like as in you couldn't be called back." So I went, changed my airplane tickets, get on a plane, fly back to Ireland, put my clothes in the washing machine, pack my bag, and wait, because I knew it was going to happen. And as soon as I was out of reach, he died. That was my dad, my beloved, 10,000 years ago. And that's kind of weird talking to your own mother who's married to your father going, back when Dad and I were partners.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I know you got to go. Mary, do you want to just let people know you got to practice, right? Where you use your experiences and your skills and your gifts to help people through situations in their own lives. And you got some books out. Do you just want to wrap up by letting people know where they can get in touch with you for all this stuff and where they can go for further information and all that?
Everything is on my website. It's Mary-Helen Hensley, HENSLEY.com. And the frequency project that I'm working on at the moment, which people might want to go and explore, is called signsmusic.com. It's SINES, like a sine wave, signs, healingmusic.com. And what we have done and what we've been working on is, I was just like, listen, I don't want people feeling like if they can't get to me, they can't heal. Everyone can heal themselves. It's just a matter of learning how to use the tools. And so we've created this site. We've replicated these frequencies that I use to heal. They're self-explanatory. Everything's on there. And people can go onto the website immediately and get cracking on working through healing themselves.
This is just for fun.
I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up